Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. I'm Anthony Giuliano, and my guest tonight is Jeff Benzing with GM. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm great, Anthony. How are you this evening?
I'm doing great. So you are nearly 5 months into your new job. Tell me what that experience has been like.
You know, it's been a great experience. Growing up in the Detroit area, I always said I would never work for an automotive company. I would never work for GM, even though I had family who had, and it led me to GM here in Fort Wayne, and it's been great. Very similar to other jobs I've had, but being able to use that experience in a very unique environment here, and a very important facility for General Motors.
So why that perception? Was it just because it was too close to home, or was there anything specific that made you say, maybe that's not for me?
Too close to home. You know, you grow up. I mean, I grew up in a neighborhood that was heavily General Motors, Chrysler people, from engineers to production workers to everybody, and didn't want anything to do with the automotive industry.
Yeah.
Had a lot of friends who were in the automotive industry, even going to college at Michigan State. In fact, one of my best friends, when I graduated from State, he said to me, I'm an engineer. I'll always be an engineer. I'll probably be with GM in life, and you'll get to go many places and do many things. And I was back up there in early May and stopped in and saw him and his wife. And he's like, I can't believe you're at General Motors now. I said, well, you said you'd always be an engineer, and I had to join you at some point. But he always said, you got a communications degree, a journalism degree. You can go anywhere and do anything you want. And that's been proven pretty true in my life.
Yeah, well, let's talk a little bit about that. So you grew up in Michigan.
Right.
Take us from, when you're starting to figure out a career path, what are you interested in doing? Where do you start in college, and where does it go from there?
My career path began at about 7 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Detroit Tigers won a 1968 World Series. I fell in love with Ernie Harwell, and I was going to be Ernie's replacement.
Okay.
That was going to be my goal in life. I was going to replace Ernie Harwell as the broadcaster for the Detroit Tigers. And from that point on, wanted to go into broadcasting.
All right. Well, it's a good thing that you didn't follow Denny McLain as a role model.
Yes.
Because after the 31 victories, not so good after that.
Not so good. Between gambling, playing the piano, or whatever else the guy did. But it was one of those things that's what I wanted to do. I mean, grew up as a kid, radio underneath the pillow at night, listening to Ernie out on the West Coast. Loved the Tigers, always loved listening to him. And, he created a love for me for radio. That took me, honestly, I began really in radio when my first 2 years of college. I went out to South Dakota. People say, South Dakota. I said, yeah, I was one of those crazy kids that I wanted to get away from home and grew up in a big city, wanted to go to a small town. Spent 2 years there, but worked at a radio station for about a year and a half, DJing on the weekends. Fun job. Worst part was doing it on Christmas Day one year. And I went in at 6 a.m. and the guy who was supposed to relieve me at 3 called in sick. So I worked from 6 a.m. till 2 a.m.
Wow.
It was a long shift.
Yeah, sounds like
But, you're by yourself spinning Christmas records. I didn't know so many people at that point had recorded White Christmas, which now is, of course, my wife's favorite song. So I guess it's apropos. But so did radio, then ended up transferring back and went to Michigan State and did journalism. Was very fortunate there that when I got in the program, they were just looking at doing electronics. This is early 80s. It was still all right. It was all writing. Yeah. And they had something called Capital News Service, and the chairman of the department came to me and said, hey, we want to do a radio version. You're in it. I'm like, I'm supposed to apply. He goes, no, you're in it.
Oh,
it was, and I'm not telling you, wasn't the best.
Is this
student.
Because you had work history?
Had work history, and I had done pretty well in some of the reporting classes.
Yeah.
So me and 3 others, we pioneered a program at Michigan State Capital News Service. I worked for WFDF out of Flint, and at the time, got to work at the state capitol, spent a whole term at 10 weeks at the state capitol every day, going down, reporting news back to the Flint radio station. And I went back a number of years later, and the chairman took me into the studio and said, because of you, we have this. So we went from alligator clips in a cassette tape recorder to a full-blown studio, and now they even do television. So it had gone a long ways. Got my degree at Michigan State.
So at this point, you've done some DJ work. You've done news. Is it a news trajectory? Is it a sports trajectory?
It kind of turns into a news sports DJ trajectory. I start my first job in northern Michigan, small station. Yeah. Doing news during the day, high school football, basketball in the evenings, and DJing on the weekend.
Okay.
You're working 70, 80 hours a week, making a whopping $150. And I realized I was making like less than $2 an hour.
Yeah.
Spent a little time in radio and realized in order to make it, it was going to be a very, very long haul.
Yeah.
And from that point, and it's kind of played out because a lot of, the news departments and radio stations are gone. I mean, it used to be you can get a radio station. I mean, even WOWO here at one time probably had, a dozen people on their news team and covered, and that's all changed.
Yeah.
So I ended up finding a job with a weekly newspaper and loved it. Thank goodness I knew how to write. Not how to spell, but how to write. Big difference. But did a newspaper for 3.5 years. Loved it. A small weekly. Ran everything. Did the sports. Did the editorials.
Is that Michigan?
Yeah, up in Frankenmuth, Michigan.
Okay.
It's a little Bavaria. So it was a great town to be in. Had some friends who were there, and then realized I wanted to get a master's degree at some point. And started looking at, well, maybe there's something else. And been there 3.5 years, making a little bit more money. And then wound up in Central Illinois for an insurance company doing agency communication. So I was writing agency newsletters, policyholder letters, whole different writing scheme, whole different array of things. And in an industry that at the time I knew nothing about.
Sure, but you're making more than $150, so you're.
Oh yeah,
now
I'm thinking, wow, I'm getting really rich now.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. It's all relative to where you are in your life.
Yeah.
And so it just kind of took a circular path from there because then at the insurance company, I went in and started. They had not done any really news releases or external PR. They started the job and I got it. And for 8 years, did all their external communications, company spokesperson on committees, doing all kinds of things in the state, which landed me a job with the National Trade Organization up in Chicago, which lasted 2 years because my family hated Chicago. I should say my wife and I. It was just a lot with 2 young children.
Yeah.
It's a tough place to be.
Yeah.
Went back, and this is where that path really starts winding, Anthony, as I go back and I get a call about going back to the town we lived in to become the Chamber of Commerce director. And I'm thinking, well, why not? I'll give it a shot.
Yeah.
And honestly, that was probably one of my favorite jobs. Absolutely loved it because I'm out in the public all day. I mean, you're out shaking hands, talking to members, trying to do good things for members. Did that for 2 years, ran into some little bit of politics, and next thing you know, first time I'm unemployed. And so the path just keeps winding. I ended up then looking for jobs, did pharmaceutical sales for a couple of years. Successful, yes, for what I had, but not enough for the company. Yeah. Leave that, go to work for a company and do some marketing stuff. And 6 months after I joined them, the pharmaceutical company let all the reps go. So I beat it by about 6 months. So, and spent a year on a contract doing some marketing PR for an ATM company. And then my wife sees an ad for International Truck in a magazine and says, why don't you apply there? And I had a job, and guess what? Next thing you know, I'm coming to Fort Wayne, Indiana to work for International, but I had also had 2 other job offers at the same time. It was one of the craziest times of my life. And came to Fort Wayne and have never looked back. It's been a great experience. So came here with Navistar, did a brief stint at Do It Best, and then spent the previous 8 years with BAE Systems. So I'm hitting all the big folks in town. I'm hitting them all the big ones.
Yeah, for sure.
A short time with a PR firm in here in town that you and I know I worked with and enjoyed it, but economics kind of got in the way. Another stint of unemployment, and then finally last year earlier this year landed with GM, and it's been nice. So my path hasn't been straight. Some people think it's a direct trajectory, and it's not. I mean, I've gone from a director to a manager to a specialist, back to a director to a specialist. So I mean, that's part of it. Your career goes all over. It's not necessarily just in one straight line.
Well, it's one of my favorite parts about doing this is learning that path for people who I know. Because how did you and I first meet? Oh, I've known you for so long that I don't remember how we first met.
Either, but it was something. It may have been through Kim Gonzalez.
Now Kim Murphy. Yep.
Yeah, Kim. I think it was through Kim Murphy. You and I met through Kim at one point.
All right. Okay.
And that's how I ended up at Do It Best was through Kim because I met her and ended up working with her for a while at Do It Best.
All right. Yeah. And now you and I serve on a board together. So GM, huge employer. Huge presence here. Obviously, the most obvious thing I can say is a brand known around the world. Tell me about that organization. The facility you work in Fort Wayne. What's that like from the inside?
it's really interesting from an inside perspective. I mean, and when I look at it, having worked for several large corporations in my life, what I have really found, and you'll know this too, marketing communications are always, when there's tough times, they get cut. I mean, that's where everyone goes first. It's the comms guy, it's the marketing guy. We cut out sales. And next thing you know, they're all complaining that no one knows anything and we're not getting any money.
Yeah.
What I've really found from GM is because of COVID last year, they found that their communications team was vital to the information that they needed to get to employees. So rather than cut people out, they've actually added.
Okay.
So every large facility has added a communications manager. We have some regional ones on some of the smaller sites, but they really have really bolstered their communications, and it's
so
and
your
it's great.
position didn't exist prior?
It did. There was a person in there prior. Stephanie Mack was in there prior for about 11 years, and she moved on to a regional role. So she has seven plants she now covers, but they're smaller plants.
Sure.
She was never dedicated just to Fort Wayne. She had multiple plants then. So this is the first truly dedicated comms person the facilities had. And they've done it in multiple facilities now because they realize the value of comms. And, and that's a big thing going forward. And they realize that, I mean, I look at the communications team and you get into marketing, you get every brand has, it's huge. I mean, I'm stunned at how big the communications teams are, but I just surprised at the size of my team. We've got like 17 people doing plant communications.
All right.
What's been really unique, what I really like on the inside is that 2 weeks before I started, I get a letter from the vice president, top guy of comms, with a gift box saying, welcome to the team, handwritten note. I had discussions with each of the person going up the chain, and it's been wonderful that they've just embraced talking to folks. Now, I'm older, and I figured that's not what they're looking for, but they're looking for experience, and it's worked out well.
Yeah.
Inside, it's interesting, pretty autonomous, which I find kind of unique, is where they say, hey, here's some messaging, tailor it to what you need. And you're not running back up the flagpole to get everything approved. So that's a nice change of pace.
And you can move quickly that way, or at least a little more quickly.
Oh, sure. I mean, and you know, lately we've had plants shut down. We've had we've got a lot of issues out there going on because of. I was going to mention it, but the chip shortage around the world.
Yeah, things beyond your control.
Things
that
beyond
are
your control.
You down.
So there's things we have to do pretty quickly. So, we get a little message and say, hey, cascade this out. However you guys want to do it. So, and I've really hit a good button, good feeling with the local plant management. We're kind of on the same page, and it's been a great fit for, I think, for me especially, because they respect already what I'm doing. I'm 5 months on the job, and they're come to me for advice. So that's kind of a nice thing to have. Yeah.
So help me understand. Like a lot of people locally, I think I have a vague sense of it's obviously a huge facility. How many employees? How big is the place? Put that into context for me if you can.
So put it in context, about 4.1 million square feet under roof.
Wow. Okay.
17 acres.
Okay.
Right there. There's 17 acres on the property. I think it's 17, maybe a little bit larger.
Yeah.
I mean, we got deer on the property, so it's pretty big.
Yeah.
About 4,400 employees.
Okay.
Most production workers. 3 shifts running 5 days a week. We don't run much on the weekends. There are times we'll run a weekend shift, but that becomes a challenge too, because you're trying to communicate with close to 3,500 people who are out on a line who don't have access to an email account or their phone's not hooked up. So we've had to find other creative ways to reach them too. Yeah,
and at a time when the employment environment is incredibly competitive too.
Oh, I think I was on the job 3 weeks and ended up at a job fair doing TV interviews because we're trying to find people, and we just did another one 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
We've had 2 job fairs, and we're still trying to find people. I think it's everywhere. Anybody who's got any type of labor need, you're hurt right now. I mean, look at the local restaurants who, they're shutting down at noon, and doing no lunchtime, or they're a lot of stuff like that. And it's become a big part of the role, is trying to find those employees and working with our talent acquisition and HR. And I sit right with the HR department, so part of their team in a way, and it's been pretty nice going there.
Yeah, well, one of the topics that has become more critical in the work that I do is employer branding. Branding writ large is, whatever the implicit promise is to the audience. Employer branding is what do people think about you as an employer. And so it sounds like your role has some synergy with that.
Absolutely. We just finished what we call a pulse survey for workplace of choice, trying to find out how employees feel.
Yeah.
Got about 1,000 of our hourly employees to actually do the survey, which was the numbers were up.
Yeah.
And you get mixed reactions from
sure,
it. I mean,
sure.
I think wherever you're at, the thing is the people who are the loudest, they're the ones who are complaining. But we have a lot of people who are very thankful for their job at General Motors. I mean, it's an interesting thing. You talk about it. Years ago, when I worked in insurance, the old saying was, it's cheaper to keep a client than it is to go and find a new one.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with an employee. It's cheaper to keep an employee, keep them happy, than to go and get a new one. I mean, even if you get someone on a production line, it's still about $100,000 to get them trained and up to date. And so when we get people coming in and churning, I mean, that's an expensive proposition for any company, and especially for GM, where you're trying to get people to work on a line to build what is one of GM's top valued products that they are trying to get out. I mean, it's the Silverado and the Sierra combined are the top selling pickup trucks in the country.
So the changes that we're seeing in the automotive industry, how much of that is being visited upon your facility? Again, only speak about what you're comfortable speaking about. But you're seeing an industry that is contemplating major changes in the coming years. How are you dealing with that, and what you communicate?
Well, huge changes, as you know. I mean, GM has kind of laid out the groundwork that by, I think, 2030, we want about half our vehicles to be electric, and hopefully by 2035, all will be electric. And I think the unique thing I'm finding with General Motors, growing up as an automobile company, is what you don't realize is it's really a technology company. And that's, as a communicator, what we're trying to get across to the employees. We're really, while we build automobiles, we're a technology company, just like Tesla is. Tesla has they're trying to build cars, but they claim to be a technology company. We build cars. We know how to build trucks and cars. And you look at a lot of technology through the years that the automobile companies have put in, and Ford and Stellantis, which is Chrysler now, and GM, they're really technology companies. They've invented a lot of things. You had OnStar. You've had, I think now GM with Super Cruise, which will be the new autonomous driving. Okay. So there's a lot of technology going in the cars today, and it shows with the chip situation. You look, in the electric car, the Hummer's coming. There's going to be eventually will be an electric Silverado, which has been announced. But right now, we're going to stay with what we call the internal combustion engine because it does make the money. It's the money that's helping to fuel the research and the development of the electric vehicles. And at some point, you'll probably see changes here at the plant. But for foreseeable future, we'll be building pickup trucks with gas and diesel engines for a while.
So as you think about your work today and the stuff that are, the bigger rocks that you're trying to move, are you still in the process of kind of onboarding and figuring it out, or you're past that? To ask that another way, what are the things that are occupying most of your time and most of your headspace these days?
Well, I'm still onboarding, so I'm still learning some things. Luckily, I have some manufacturing background between BAE and Navistar, so I get some of that. Still navigating because the standpoint is, we're now in a almost 40-year-old facility. So there's a lot of technology stuff that has to be done. There's a lot of stuff that gets moved and removed and moved and removed and moved over. And I think the big challenge that I'm working on is one, learning, trying to get a feel for the floor, which I don't do enough of getting out and talking to folks, but it's getting better. But I think the big thing is the challenge that I think anybody has is making sure employees understand that their employer really cares about them, that the employer, we're making money, but we also understand that their well-being, that their family's well-being is something that GM and we care about. And so there's a variety of things that you have to learn. A lot of programs, health programs and fitness programs and safety programs. This week is our what we call it's our safety week, and I just lost it, but it's a whole week of nothing but talking about safety. Because we want people to come in and go away the same as they came in and go away whole. But the tough part in a role like this is finding the right communication tools, finding the right, and you call it branding, but branding the company with your employees, because it's key, because they also then become your best marketers.
Yeah, for sure.
If your employees, and our employees are proud of those products that come off that line, I can tell you that, they would go in the parking lot and you'll see everyone's different. You'll see all the brands out there outside of the foreign cars, but But those GM pickup trucks are something they're extremely proud of.
Sure.
And that's what they want to know, is that they're important. And as a vital plant as Fort Wayne is, and trying to communicate the company's perspective to them is key. And again, it's marketing to them, but in a sense, using them to market to everybody else.
Yeah. So you started this job in the middle of a pandemic. What's that been like, knowing that, there's all kinds of, shifting rules and norms and things being communicated to employees? How is that going?
Well, and that's part of the communication process too, because I'm involved in all of that. And a lot of times on phone calls in the morning, or we have a weekly call that we get on. And so things can shift quickly. I mean, we went maskless for those who are vaccinated for about 3 to 4 weeks. And then, of course, things picked up again, and we went back to mask. It's interesting when everyone took their mask off, because there's people who would walk by that I would know if they had their mask on, but I did not recognize with their mask off. So that's kind of an interesting thing. But it's also the constant communication on what's going on, and the ever-changing rules, regulations, processes, procedures, not just from GM's perspective, but even governmental. And
because you're basically following CDC and OSHA recommendations, correct?
Trying to as best you can. And then you get people, and you get both sides. There's two sides to it. Some people think it's ridiculous. Some people think that we're not doing enough, and some people think, oh, hey, this is enough. Let's just leave it where we're at. And so that's been a battle too. I mean, that's part of in my role, especially because since we have a union, and because you have, and there really shouldn't be, but you always have the management and hourly line that they always want to create, and it shouldn't be there. And we're as communicators, we're trying to get rid of that line. But I think the big thing too is juggling that line of staying somewhat neutral. But again, also you've got, GM pays the bills, so I've got to kind of lean to where the company's going on things. But to kind of clarify to employees why we're doing what we're doing. We're not doing it because they're bad people.
You're not trying to make the work environment
No, we're not
worse.
trying. I mean, it'd be better for everyone if they didn't have to wear a mask.
I mean, for sure.
I can't stand wearing a mask. I mean, by the end of the week, it's kind of like,
I don't know a lot of people who like doing it.
No one likes doing it, but I think a lot of it is being cautious. Things have calmed down since when I started. I mean, we used to do temperature screens and questioning, and then we went just, wear a mask. And so people have accepted it, and I think, and I wouldn't be surprised if at some point it just becomes a norm for a lot of people are going to wear a mask no matter what. But just getting the COVID information out to folks. We report weekly on how many cases we have. We let them know if we're doing a vaccine clinic. We've got to constantly keep them up to date on what we're doing. And we get a lot of help from Detroit. I mean, it gives me a lot of information, too, that we can tailor sometimes to our current situation.
Well, with 4,400 employees, you're kind of running a small city in itself. So
It is. I mean, I think it's the largest private employer outside of the hospitals. I mean, I know the school district's got, Fort Wayne schools are big and the hospitals are big, but I think GM kind of outshines them all. And it is a small city out there. I mean, we have our own rescue teams out there now. It's in a couple of weeks we got some new services coming to where you won't even have to go get your car gas, because the company's going to have a fuel service that'll come in and fill up your car. So they're trying to do anything to make it easy on the employees and bringing in as many perks as they can.
Sure. So I want to pivot to the speed round of the show, where we talk about some of the things we've already talked about, but in a more concise way. So you've had a really varied career. You've done a lot of different things. You've lived in slightly different places across the Midwest. You've had times when your job went away unexpectedly. You had times when you had multiple job offers on the table. What's your best career advice? If you were talking to someone who's just getting started in their career, or someone who maybe was facing the prospect of a job loss, or someone who was looking at multiple offers, what would you tell someone about what it takes to be successful in a career?
I think the most important thing is stay positive. Stay positive with your career, even if it gives you a curveball, and don't get down on yourself. I mean, people can really, really get down on themselves if you lose a job. I mean, I can tell you the first time I did, I was for weeks kind of like, you're just out of it. And just kind of, I know it was a speed round, but really quick. So it was so funny because I lost the job with the Chamber of Commerce. And within months, the executive director of the organization, another person was wiped out. And I had created a plan, which was to we had an economic development and convention and visitor bureau and chamber were kind of combined. And my plan was, I think the three of them need to be separated. So, you get let go. 3 months later, after I'm let go, they announce we're separating the organizations. And I watched then now for the next 3 years, my blueprint that I had laid out come to fruition. And that's when I got off and said, hey, you are doing the right thing.
Yeah, sure.
And I think it's staying positive, but and it's making connections.
Yeah.
That's my best career advice. Even from someone starting out, get connected to somebody. Find someone in an area you're interested. Reach out to them.
Yeah.
I was fortunate that I had a couple good mentors that came along in my life. One of them was at the newspaper, who he had a previous publisher. His name was Edmund Arnold. He actually created the design for USA Today.
Oh, wow.
He had been one time the owner of that newspaper up in Frankenmuth. And he gave me some great advice of, hey, you got to keep going. You got to keep striving.
Yeah.
Don't ever give up what you're doing, and you can always improve. And him and then Stan Soffen at Michigan State University were really instrumental in me in my early part of my career. And not so much for a lot of contacts, but at least keep you on the positive side of things. So making those connections, I think, is huge. And then from that, don't ever look any opportunity down. And don't say, I'm going to stay in this industry because, I've worked in insurance, I've worked in hardware, I've worked in automotive, I've worked in, aeronautical, I've worked, all over. And in marketing and communications, you can do it all.
Yeah. So next question. When you describe the organization you work for to someone who doesn't know much about it, and it's a hard one, it's a big organization, what do you say about GM?
Kind of already put it on the table with you earlier, was it's really now a technology company more than an automotive company.
Yeah.
Because automotive is tech. It's a high-tech company. Even within the facility, there are jobs there now that weren't there 20 years ago, 30 years ago when the plant opened. Now we need people to run robots. We need people to run computers. So just the technology involved in manufacturing is amazing. The one that boggles my mind is the one where they attach the chassis and the box together onto the frame. They put everything together, the body and the chassis together, and this huge robot does it. And they said, it used to take 6 guys. Yeah. And a lot of them would get their rotator cuff torn and get injured because of the way it was. And now this thing comes in, bolts it all together in about 10% of the time.
Yeah.
And 6 people lost their job, or maybe 18 people. They went to different jobs, but they actually saved people because now they're not getting injured. Yeah. And some of those things, technology-wise, GM and Ford and the rest have really, really pushed those technology. And I think that's it. It's a technology company that builds trucks and automobiles.
Okay. So a little bit of a sidebar. You've worked for some really big organizations, global organizations. Is that something you think you're built for, or have you just adapted to that environment because that's where your career path has taken you?
I think it's adaptability. And I to me, that was key, having a journalism degree. Yeah. I've got an MBA in marketing, and it's being adaptable. And I think if you have those things, and I've worked for small companies. Worked for a small PR firm. I worked for a chamber that had 8 people in it. Yeah. So I've worked large and small. So you just adapt. And if you have the right soft skills, I think you can. Yeah. And I think that's a key. I think that's another key, not just for people in marketing, but I think people in any position is finding those soft skills, because there's engineers who get promoted into management jobs and they're terrible because they don't have the soft skills. Sure. So that's something that even GM's trying to do, and it's stuff that BAE Systems is doing and Navistar was doing, is how do we develop these folks into soft skills? Yep. Because they got the hard skills, they can do the math, they can do the science, but what about dealing with people
skills? Yeah.
And I think it's become apparent that people skills end up being more important in the end than some of those other things.
Yeah, for sure. My belief, and this might be self-preservation more than anything else because I have no real skills, but my belief is that you're better differentiated by relationships and people skills than those hard skills. You can have 2 people who are both, one who's a great accountant, one who's a decent accountant. The decent accountant will do way better if their relationship and people skills are better. Oh,
it's all about relationships. Yeah. I don't care if you're in sales, you're in marketing, if you're in management, because even if you're, for instance, our plant director, he still has to be a salesman. He still has to sell himself, his plans, his vision, has to be sold to everybody in the plant. So, and a friend of mine here in town, Mike Roth, who was at Navistar, and one of the things one day he came in at Navistar, and Mike had a shirt and tie on, and we never wore shirt and tie at that point. Mm-hmm. And I said, "Oh, you got an interview today?" And he says, "I interview every day."
Huh.
And I thought, what a great line. I mean, and he was serious. Every day you're in the office, every day you're working, every day you're out, you're interviewing, because you never know where that next opportunity is going to come. You never know what's going to befall on you. You just don't know. And so he was basically prepared every day as an interview. And I thought that was kind of a unique perspective of going to work.
Yeah, I'm going to have to start dressing better. Yeah, for sure.
It's been interesting because I started my career wearing blue jeans and shirts going to radio station. I got to the point where I was wearing, $400 or $500 suits every day because I worked for an insurance company. To now I'm back to wearing shirts and blue jeans every day. So I kind of like the jeans feel, though. It's kind of nice to go into work with the blue jeans on, and especially if you're in a plant environment. It can get dirty at times.
For sure. So last question, I mentioned you started a job in the midst of a pandemic and you were looking for your next opportunity at the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
What have you learned from that experience? Now that hopefully, while there's been significant bumps in the road, hopefully we're coming out of this at some point in the near future. What have you learned from the pandemic or during the pandemic that you didn't know before that you think is going to stick with you moving forward, either as a marketer in your career path or whatever resonates with you?
That's a great question. The one thing I found is when the pandemic began and I joined the PR firm, and a lot of it was remote. I mean, everybody was working remote.
Yeah.
What stuck with me though is you still can't beat being with the person every day with your peers or working with people. It's great you can work remote, and in fact, GM now we've got people who are staying in places like they're working for Detroit, but they're in Minneapolis or they're in New York. And I think you lose some continuity when you're not around other people.
Yeah,
and that stuck with me pretty heavily. I see a big difference in the fact that I think people want to be around people.
Yeah.
And as much as remote is nice, and it's nice to use on occasion, I'm just wondering how long it's going to stay.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a positive in it that I think we've learned how to leverage the benefits of remote. And I don't think it has to be, and I hope it doesn't become an either-or scenario. There was a podcast I listened to right at the beginning of the pandemic, and they said a lot of things that helped kind of calm me down. And one of them was that, there are things that are better done remote. Asynchronous communication. Sometimes it's better to give a status update on paper because everybody has the same information. They can read it on their own time, and they have something to refer back to as opposed to that being done verbally. But there's just no substitute for collaboration and teamwork and relationship building than face-to-face. And I think it's about leveraging the best of both of those, especially in large organizations that have to have some standards and can't be free form for every employee.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think that the thing about remote is it is going to give people opportunities to do some jobs they wouldn't have been able to do. Yeah. So you're not going to see, there are some jobs you don't have to be sitting next to somebody.
Yeah.
Teams has been great, or Zoom or whatever, because at least you could see people face to face. So I think that's going to stick with us. But I think companies are also going to see that there's, like you said, there's that collaboration that sometimes you got to have. And I think the other thing coming out of this is that humans are adaptable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Whatever the situation is, we can adapt to it given time. You look at schools, you look at businesses, people adapted really quick. Now, GM, our situation is you can't adapt, you can't build trucks remotely.
Yeah, sure.
There's some things you can't do remotely. And I think the other thing that sticks with me through this, Anthony, on a marketing perspective is as we look at social media, is it damaging us more than it's helping from the standpoint of, some people call it censorship, but are we getting the full story? And I think it's damaged a lot of reputations. I think news reputations, organization reputations, and that's the sad part. Things that you used to be able to trust, now everyone is questioning everything. And I think that's one thing I learned is, and it's going to stick with me, is you start questioning everything now, whatever you hear. And that's a sad part of it. There's no authority anymore.
Yeah, well, and I haven't been on the record as saying this, but I've thought it, and I'll share it here because you brought it up for the first time, is I used to say social media is neither bad nor good, but it's a net good by about this much. I don't know that I believe that anymore. What I'm seeing is people getting fed more information that reflects their worldview only and not enough productive deliberation and debate. And I think it leads to that distrust, because if I'm living in a silo and I'm hearing the same thing over and over again, and there's something out from the outside that challenges that, now I'm more entrenched. And regardless of which side you're on,
exactly,
I'm more entrenched in whatever I believe. And I think that the real magic happens when you say, I don't know, when you say, I'm not sure, when you say, I want to learn, more about this.
Exactly.
But we're all becoming very entrenched, and we all think we have all the answers when it's, I think, less certain that any of us have any of the answers.
And that leads into what we were talking about earlier with GM, is me straddling that line to make sure that we don't get that line, that divide at the office. I mean, that's really important, that we kind of give them both sides of the story as much as we can. But you're right. I mean, there's a great divide right now, and it's sad, and it's an information divide. I think we're almost. I mean, I was honestly within a few days of dropping out of Facebook. Totally. The only reason I'm on Facebook is we have our own internal Facebook page now, because it was the best way to communicate with employees when they're sitting at home, especially the folks who are on the line. They can get into a page, they can find the information. And that's where we're heading as a company, is that channel is growing for us, because that's where we're putting a lot of our information out for
It's
employees.
meeting people where they already are.
They're there. Some people are like, I'm not on Facebook. Okay, but that's where the information's going. So, don't post anything. Just get a Facebook page. And so you can get our information and sign up for the page and make sure you're getting the latest information, because it goes there as soon as we'll put it out. I mean, I did a communication last week to announce we were coming back. So there's an email. There's a notification that goes out on your phone and everything else. And then there's Facebook. I mean, you use them all. And I think that's key, too. When you're in my role in production, you're using every channel you can find and reach people.
Absolutely. There's a guy who was on the podcast close to a year ago named Andrew Booth, who works at MedPro and does learning and development for MedPro. He does marketing for MedPro. And he said something that has stuck with me. He said, today it's all about consistency of message told through as many different mediums as you can, making sure the message is the same, but you're using as many different media as you get your arms around. And going back to Facebook, I have deactivated Facebook now for the second time, and I think it's permanent, but I still have a fake account that is my name spelled slightly wrong for client stuff. And my rule is, if it is a client that I have to look at their Facebook insights, or for the class I teach, the irony was I dumped Facebook and then I said, the best way for us to communicate outside of class is going to be through Facebook. So I was like, okay, I guess I have to be back on. But I said, because of the degree to which it's negative, and some of that's a reflection of my personality, I just don't think I'm built for the beating that I feel like I take on Facebook when I go there. And some of it is self-imposed, hitting myself in my own shoe. But, I've found a compromise that works for me. But I certainly, I think that, you're definitely onto something with the questions you're asking about social media, but also balancing that with the imperative to be present, because, for all of its warts, can be a good communication tool.
You've got to be there, but you don't want to be there. I think the big thing is, with all the social media channels out there now, even the new ones that are popping up, it's almost too much. I'm a newspaper junkie. I, 5 years old, would be reading the newspaper. My parents were amazed. I'd go through the sports scores and everything else. And, today the newspapers, they're dying. And even go online, it's tough to read online, and everybody wants you to pay. And that gets tough. And so you go to other sources, and there's just too much. I think it's information overload. It's what's happening. And so many people, like you said, they go then to the source that backs what their opinion is.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've tried to do, and I don't succeed at this every day, is I've kind of decided I'm going to leverage strategic ignorance and say I'm just going to opt out of a lot of this stuff. and I'm going to learn through people and try to keep my network somewhat diverse so that when I'm sitting across the table from you, I'm going to ask you what's going on in your world, and I'm going to get a different perspective than I might if I'm talking to Nick or if I'm talking to other people. And hopefully it's diverse enough that I'm going to learn from that and not just trust the algorithm to tell me what it is I think I should know.
Yeah, how true. I mean, I hate that about social media. Although my wife will say she'll mention something and then she pulls up Facebook and it's whatever she mentioned just pops up, so it scares the heck out of her.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, they're great tools used if they're used properly.
Yeah,
and I think right now they're just being used as propaganda and on both sides, whatever side you're on, and it's disheartening.
Yeah.
I mean, I go back to a story, and this is a professor I had at Michigan State, and my feeling about journalism today is we were told to we're given facts to do an obituary.
Yeah.
So I write this obituary. And of course, I put in, he's a great guy, whatever. I can't remember all the, the adjectives you used to describe this gentleman. And I get it back from the professor, Professor Cullen is his name, and a big red F on it. And I'm like, he goes, it's well written. I said, yeah. He goes, but if I wanted your, expletive opinion, I would have asked for it. If you're not doing a restaurant review or a movie review or an editorial, I don't give a darn what you have to say.
Yeah.
Give me the facts.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are today. Everything doesn't have to be written with the slant. Lay out the facts. Let us decide for ourselves. And I think that's where the divide's coming is everyone wants to put their spin on the story, and then you don't know what's the accurate part of the story anymore.
Yeah, there's not enough objectivity, so you got to create that on your own, and that's hard to do.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
and that is unless you go to multiple sources.
For sure. Well, my new rule of thumb starting this past January was only happy social media. On Instagram, I follow people I know in real life. The only brands I follow are clients. I'm on LinkedIn, which is 90% self-promotional, which is happy. No one's going to speak ill of themselves.
Right.
Sometimes some stuff sneaks in that I don't like. And that's really it. And I try to avoid, I haven't mastered it yet. So I'm not, this isn't a grandstand. It's a question of, it's to expose the fact that I'm continuing to question, how do you navigate all this and still be a good public citizen because you're informed,
right,
without it becoming toxic?
And I'm with you. I mean, I follow people that I like, people I know.
Yeah.
I follow a lot of bourbon accounts.
Well, that'll make you happy really quick.
That makes you really happy. Which is, it's kind of thrown, it's like I'm not following, and I follow a couple of my sports teams, but, political wise, I'm not following anybody anymore, pretty much. I mean, it's some friends and some family, and like I said, some bourbon. I got into watching YouTube bourbon shows, which has been pretty exciting lately.
Yeah, well, sometime we will have to sit together and drink bourbon and watch one of those shows.
That sounds great. There's a great one out there called It's Bourbon Night that I felt that has been it's the one that sucked me in and has kept me going.
All right. Well, we should definitely do that and talk more about these topics that we've probably lost everyone on at this point. But certainly, I think it's important, and it does affect the work that we do, even if it's only in an oblique way.
Oh yeah. It definitely does. I mean, it really, I mean, as you know, marketing, social media marketing has become huge. It's where most of the dollars are going nowadays. And even if you're on, TV anymore, who knows if anybody's seeing it, because if they're streaming or they're channel changing, I mean, the advertising dollars have gone in multiple directions. And used to be you had billboards, radio, and TV, and newspapers, and that was it. And now it's yellow pages.
Trust me, and you know this too. Some days I'd love to go back to 1992. It was simpler, but the reality is, toothpaste is out of the tube, and a big part of our work is helping people sort that out and reaching an audience that is increasingly hard to reach.
Well, and even marketing wise into a company, it's fine. The channels to find the channels to reach our employees. It's just as difficult. We have some employees who still want to read something on paper.
Yeah, for sure.
We have people who want it on Facebook. Yep. We have people, and I end up thinking ends up being the most effective way is face to face, or their leader coming to them and talking to them. As much as we want to say all these other communication channels are great, I think that personal communication is probably the best there is out there. And it's just like advertising. Word of mouth beats anything else that you can do. I mean, you can put all the money you want in radio, TV, but if you get one bad review or someone starts knocking you down on the street,
yeah, for sure,
that probably weighs more to people than an ad they hear on WOWO.
Yeah, it just comes down to trust, and that's still transacted person to person.
Exactly, and I think that's what we're trying to find with GM is how do we build that trust and give the information to our employees through their group leaders or however they want to find it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jeff, this has been a pleasure. We have succeeded in turning what was the speed round of the show into the longest part of the show, which I kind of thought we might do. But thank you very much. It's been great hearing about your background and a little bit of the work you're doing today.
Well, thanks. It's an honor to be here.
And thanks, everyone who took time to listen to this episode. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you will join us then.